Well, I'm still going. It's day 15. I don't know where I am. This video is about my third week on the Camino, but first of all I've got an important update on the boots or shoes question. Now, last time I did say I'm not doing any more boots or shoes things because there's only so much you can say about the subject, but Isolde, who has become the Count Everything roaming reporter, is just finishing her Camino about now, and for the last week she's been counting the numbers of boots and shoes in the boot rooms at the albergues where she's been staying. Here are her results. Here they are as a percentage, and the overall percentage we think is about 56% of people at the end of the Camino are still wearing boots, and about 44% of people are wearing shoes. So most people prefer boots, a lot of people like shoes. I think we knew that already, but Isolde is doing something much more important than just counting, although on the Count Everything channel that's a good thing to do. I'll give you a clue. I don't know what Isolde is wearing on her feet. She hasn't told me her opinion. She hasn't tried to convince me that she knows better than anyone else. And this might sound a bit trivial, but no, everyone on the internet, as far as I can tell, or at least has watched the channel, has an opinion about whether they prefer boots or shoes. And quite a few of them have left it in the comments. But Isolde's doing something different. She's not reinforcing her own prejudices. She's not telling me her own opinions. She's walking the Camino with an open mind. And it might sound not very interesting, but I didn't start the Count Everything channel because I was interested in what people wear on their feet on the Camino. I do not have an unhealthy interest in other people's feet. For me, the Count Everything channel was about doing the Camino from the point of view of science and reason. So by walking the Camino with an open mind, Isolde's, she's doing it properly, isn't she? Also, she's not just stopping there, she's asking me questions about it, what counts as a shoe and what counts as a boot? Given that modern lightweight boots don't weigh that much and are fairly similar to walking shoes, does it even make sense to break them up into those categories? So, one day everyone will think in the same way as Isolde. Politicians quite often appear on television without any scientific basis for what they say. They just give their opinion. So one day, come the revolution, everyone will think like Isolde, and we will all be scientific and try and understand the world as best we can. So I'm awarding Isolde the Count Everything Hero of the Revolution medal, and here she is wearing it. So well done, Isolde. And if anyone else has any scientific opinions about things, let me know, and you might very well get a medal as well. So back to week 3. The beginning of week 3 is very roughly about halfway through the Camino, and everyone seems quite aware of it. So for example, on one particular day, 2 people asked me independently if I'd thought about what I was going to do when I'd finished the Camino. And normally when people ask those sorts of questions, that means they're thinking about it themselves. I looked at how many kilometres a day I was walking. I realised if I carried on walking at 30 kilometres a day, I'd arrive at Santiago quite early. But I was quite happy to do that. You know, there's only you can only put up with sleeping in the dormitories, all the snoring for so long. So arriving at Santiago and having it all finished, that was quite appealing to me. Of course, the Camino is all about thinking about what's important to you. And so halfway through the Camino, I decided to do my financial accounts. And I worked out I was spending about 25 euros a day. And to spend that amount, I was staying in the albergues recommended in the guidebook, eating the pilgrim's menu, you know, having the pilgrim lifestyle. Plus, when I stayed at a Donativo, whereas a young person who didn't have much money might give 5 euros, I always gave 20 euros because that's the rule at the Donativos, you know, pay what you can. And also I bought quite a lot of extra food, so I always had bananas first in the morning, plenty of bread and cheese, lots of Diet Coke. So I was trying my best to spend the money, but I could only manage to spend about 25 euros a day, which I thought was quite good. Next, I need to apologise. Towards the end of the last video, I described a man who had a bad cough and he didn't sound very well sleeping in the dormitory that night. I had a comment from someone saying they were looking forward to find out what happened to the man, and they were definitely going to watch the next video. I didn't mean to make this video sound as though it was going to be interesting. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know I try quite careful to make sure they're not interesting. And it might sound like a funny thing to say, but you have to be careful, because if you give your video an interesting title, lots of people will watch it, so be careful. And in fact, if it was down to me, YouTube would have taken these videos down years ago. That evening I had a meal with an Italian man who didn't speak any English, so we spoke for an hour in Spanish. Very basic Spanish, but still we managed to communicate with each other. So that night I slept in the dormitory with a coughing man. Got up the next morning, didn't think anything of it, walked to the next albergue, did my washing, sat in the garden for a bit in the sun, went back into the dormitory, and in comes the man with a terrible cough. And he didn't look very well, and feeling a bit sorry for himself. So I said, "Oh, the bunk underneath me is free." And he seemed happy about that, and we started talking. We went into the garden together, and I shared my bread and cheese with him, and we exchanged stories. He didn't speak Spanish, and he only had very, very basic English, so it was quite hard work, but you know, I felt a bit sorry for him, and it was nice to have some company. We ate the evening meal together, communicating from time to time with Google Translate, because that was the only way really. We went to bed. The rule on the Camino is you might have a great time with your fellow pilgrims at the evening meal, you all go to bed, and then you get up the next morning without saying goodbye. You all leave separately. Lying in bed, I thought, I wonder if he'll want to walk with me tomorrow, and I wonder whether I should walk with him. And I thought, when in the past, when pilgrims have told me about people who've given up walking on the Camino, it's not just physical things, but quite often, if you don't speak Spanish, and if you don't speak English, or only have very basic English, it can be quite hard walking the Camino, it can be quite lonely. So I was thinking, maybe he's going to give up, maybe I should walk with him to help him out a bit. It's quite easy to do the right thing when you know other people are watching you. When you think that nobody's watching, first thing in the morning in a dark dormitory, it would be quite easy just to sneak out, and no one would ever know. But you'd have to be quite a weak and selfish person to do that, wouldn't you? So anyway, I tried to sneak out in the dark in the dormitory, but he was awake and he caught me and he said, "Can we walk together today?" So I said, "Okay." I said, "Do you want half an hour to get ready? Do you need to have something to eat or to go to the toilet?" He said, "Oh no," he was ready to go then. So we set off. About after an hour, he wanted to go to the toilet, so we found a bar. And when we were in the bar, I bought a 1.5 litre bottle of water, because he didn't seem to have very much water on him. And in hot weather you need to drink a lot of water, and if you're coughing up your lungs every 10 minutes, then you need to drink even more water. So I bought the bought the bottle of water and I put it in my own rucksack, and as we were walking I encouraged him to drink lots. He didn't walk very fast, and whenever I was trying to video, for the YouTube channel, he kept walking in the way, but I tried to be patient. And when we went to a village, we went past a shop, so we went into the shop and they spoke to us in English, and we bought some bread and cheese, so we could sit in the garden that evening and eat our sandwiches, and he got some bananas and things. But one of the problems was we didn't communicate with each other very well, because he only spoke very basic English. Also, I did try to be patient, but you have to make progress on the Camino. It is fair to say that I wasn't the most enthusiastic person when he asked me first thing in the morning, but I said yes, and I was sort of polite, but rather than enthusiastic. But by the time we arrived at the next albergue, I don't know what it was, but it was just the relationship had broken down. We did eat the evening meal together that night, but I think we both realised we weren't going to walk together the next day. Seneca has written a book called On Benefits, where he discusses about how you get on with people and how you help them, and the do's and don'ts. It's 89,317 words long that have been copied down over the centuries, so 2,000 years later all the information's there. And Seneca says you bestow a benefit on somebody when you try and help them, or in fact when you try and do anything that you don't have to do but you do willingly. So for example, even in everyday society, you might, for example, go and buy a newspaper. If you're polite and friendly to the shop assistant and they're polite and friendly to you, then you're sort of being nice to yourself, right? You don't have to be friendly to people, but it's just a nice thing to do. And in fact, if you count out the exact money, so the shop assistant doesn't have to find any change, then you've helped them, and it's it's a nice thing to do. So for Seneca, helping other people in this everyday mundane way of doing things is an important part of society. There's all sorts of different types of situation, but they all involve bestowing a benefit on someone, on trying to help them. So for example, in the most serious situations, then you would help everyone if you were able to. In the really trivial situations like everyday living, it's quite easy to be nice to people and to be polite and friendly, so you may as well do that. But then he says there's a sort of a middle ground where you've got a bit of a dilemma, who am I going to help, how am I going to help them? But he does give some rules about how best to do it. So for example, he says if you decide to help somebody, you need to do it generously and in good heart, because nobody likes being helped. We're all quite proud and we don't want to feel bad about the fact that someone's having to help us. So if you do it that way, it makes everything better. And also it makes it easier for the person you're helping to appreciate you. If you help them in a way that makes you feel you're telling them off, you're hopeless, I'm going to have to help you, that's a bad thing to do. And in fact, the actual benefit you're bestowing on someone isn't the physical thing. If you gave, for example, someone some money, that wouldn't be the benefit you were bestowing on them. The actual thing that you're doing that's good, and they will remember and appreciate, is that you're one human who wants to help another person, and they if they appreciate it, then the benefit you've bestowed on them isn't lost. Even after they've spent the money, the fact that they appreciate the help you've given them, that means the benefit still carries on. And this is the most important thing about bestowing benefits. First of all, that it's done in a generous and open-hearted way, or good-hearted way, and it's appreciated. And Seneca says the worst people are people who don't help other people, and people who don't appreciate when they have been helped. And he says we've been helped by everyone, or lots of people, throughout our whole lives. Our parents, teachers, friends, complete strangers. We've all been helped, and it's important we all remember. And if we don't remember, if we think we're great people because we're just great people, then you don't appreciate the help you've been given, and that's quite a bad thing to do. Whereas if you appreciate the help that people have given to you, and you remember it, then even if, 30 or 40 years ago a teacher helped you to do one difficult thing you were having trouble with, if you remember that now, then you're still enjoying that benefit. Something else that Seneca notices is you help people without any hope of return. And in fact, if you help someone in the hope they'll remember and you'll get a benefit later on from them, then he says that's really the act of a bank manager, someone who's making an investment rather than helping. And he says because we help without any personal benefit to ourselves, that shows that humans are basically good, and we want to do good things, and helping other people is a good thing to do. So it's just part of being human, and it's an important part that we do that. Here's an example of a benefit being bestowed from a previous video. When I walked the North Downs Way before I walked the Camino, because I needed a bit of practice, I got to Reigate Hill, and there's a memorial to an American aircraft that crashed in fog during the Second World War. So the American aircrew came to Britain to help protect Britain during the war. They lost their lives in doing so. So it doesn't matter what that individual airplane or those aircrew actually contributed to the war, but just the fact that they were prepared to come and help us, and they lost their lives in doing so, that was the benefit they bestowed. And while the people of Reigate continued to remember that what the aircrew did, they continued to receive the benefit, and in that way they're showing their gratitude. And it would be completely different if, say, the American Armed Forces had put up the memorial and said, people of Reigate, make sure you remember. That would change it altogether, wouldn't it? But the people of Reigate have done that themselves. They want to remember. They're still enjoying the benefit that the aircrew bestowed on them over 70 years later. And in fact, the oldest person on that aircraft was only 24 years old. So although they were only in this world for a very short time, the benefit they bestowed has lasted 70 years, and I expect it will last another 70 years. So presidents come and go, the balances of power change, but these are the sorts of things that people remember. So bestowing a benefit and just human kindness is quite important, isn't it? So what went wrong with me and the coughing man? Now I've read Seneca again. I think the problem was when he asked if we could walk together, I didn't do it in a generous and a good-hearted way. I wasn't exactly grudging, but in the same time I wasn't enthusiastic. Also, when I thought I was helping, when I thought, well, I'll carry some extra water for him and make sure he has enough food to eat, really I wonder if I was almost nagging him, and almost like Seneca says, if you help someone, do it in a good way, don't make them feel bad about it. Maybe I made him feel bad that he wasn't carrying enough water and those sorts of things. So in summary, I don't think he would have felt he'd received a benefit, and therefore he wouldn't be grateful for the help I gave him, because he would just see me as being annoying. So that was that. We had an evening meal together, it was fine, but we didn't walk together the next day. Also, another issue which I've thought about afterwards is communication and general politeness and etiquette and those sorts of things. There are a lot of people on the Camino Frances, so having good social skills is a good thing to do. So as well as working out how best to carry water, how many kilometres a day to walk, it's worth thinking about dealing with other people. I've done a bit of Googling. There is an organisation in Britain called Debrett's. It's been around for hundreds of years. Normally they give advice on when you meet the Queen and all those sorts of things, but they do have some good advice that's worthwhile in general situations. Two of them I worked out myself in the Camino. Number one, remember people's names. Number two, if you want to walk on your own or anything like that, it's okay to tell someone, it's not a great insult if you don't want to walk with them. And then maybe that's something that went wrong as well with me and the coughing man. I didn't say maybe we'll walk for the morning, or we'll just walk for this one day. I tried to hint to him that I wasn't keen on walking together. So saying things out loud and saying how you feel about things in a genuine, polite way, I think that's better than trying to hint. It's quite easy to sit in a room and read a book by Seneca and think, oh yes, I understand this now and I'm an expert in it. But you have to go into the world and try these things out, so you realise, number one, what he was talking about, number two, and how you fit into the world yourself, and try and get your ideas straight. Next day and set off on my own. That day I planned to walk up one of the alternative routes that runs parallel to the Camino, and on the way there I met a young man. We walked together. He wanted to go up that alternative route as well. We phoned ahead and booked at the albergue, because if you go on an alternative route there might not be that many albergues there, and if lots of people went up there might not be anywhere to stay. So we phoned up, we booked a place, which meant we had to stay in a more expensive albergue. There was a municipal one there, but you can't book in the municipal one, so we booked into an albergue. It was €15 a night, which was really good. On the way there we met another man. So the young man was 23, I was 49, and the other man was 69, and you know, different age groups. We all marched along together. We all stopped at the same albergue. We checked in. I shared when we got to the albergue, instead of having dormitories, they had individual rooms, or double rooms. So I shared a room with the young man, €15 each, and I paid for him, because that's quite expensive for a young person to pay. The older man, he stayed in a room by himself. That night the young man, he'd found some friends in the municipal albergue, so I had dinner with the older man, who was American, and a French woman who'd lived some time in Madrid, so she spoke good Spanish and she spoke good English. So the three of us all spoke good English, and we sat at a table by ourselves. And it's the first dinner I had in since St Jean-Pierre-de-Port or Roncesvalles, where I really enjoyed the dinner. You know, it wasn't a worthy or an important interaction with my fellow pilgrims. You know, I just enjoyed it because we could all speak to each other and we all had a similar sense of humour. The American man had heard us checking into the albergue in Spanish, and he said I'd like to be able to speak some words of Spanish. So me and the French woman taught him what we thought were important phrases, and I wrote them down on a piece of A4 paper and gave them to him. The more red wine he drank, the more confident he got, and whenever the waitress came in, he spoke to her in Spanish and asked her things like, where are the toilets please, and those sorts of things. So it was, she didn't seem to mind it too much, so it was a good night. And that's something on the Camino you don't have that often. There are lots of worthy communal meals sitting round, being polite and talking to each other, but I always remember them as being a bit like being at a wedding. You know, everyone's very polite and friendly, but you don't know anyone, and it's all a bit, you know, you're just glad when it's over at the end. So, but this night there was a really enjoyable evening, which I remember. This photograph is taken from inside our double room at the albergue, and can you notice something about it? Can you see everyone has left their doors open? Because after being on the Camino for 2 weeks, living in the dormitories, to shut yourself away seems quite strange. But here's something that Seneca says about it. Do not deem yourself truly happy until you can live before the eyes of others. The walls that surround us don't enable us to live more safely, but allow us to sin more secretly. You will scarcely find anyone who can live with a door wide open. What profits us to hide ourselves away and to avoid the eyes and ears of others? If your deeds are honourable, let everybody know them. If base, what does it matter that no one knows when you yourself know them already? But don't worry, at a lovely shower you could lock yourself away in if you wanted to sin more secretly. This next day is day 18, which I've already spoken about in the series A Day on the Camino Part 3, when I met some 5 very glamorous Irish women at a communal meal. Here's what happened. On one evening I was in an albergue at the communal meal, and there were lots of people sat at the table, but among them were 5 very glamorous women from Ireland. And you know, I know my place in the world, so I was polite and friendly, and then I kept myself to myself. But they weren't having that. They wanted to talk to me, they wanted to tell me all about themselves and tell me about their adventures on the Camino, and they wanted to know about me, and it went on and on, you know, and I found out all about them. I know all about the Pilates they do in the town and the new machines they've got. That was quite nice, but maybe they were just being polite. But anyway, a couple of days later I saw 3 of them sat at the side of the Camino in the shade having a picnic, and as soon as they saw me they called out to me, you know, they remembered my name and they waved, and it was such a spontaneous, genuine reaction, just that kindness and warmth that the Irish women showed me, it just made me realise, how segregated the lives of men and women are in normal life. So, do you know what the Irish women did? They treated me in a very kind way when they didn't really have to, so they bestowed a benefit on me that I remember now and appreciate, so I'm still benefiting from the kindness they showed me. You might be thinking, well, if this happened on day 18, what on earth was going on for the first 17 days? Well, it's a good question, and I shall now tell you all about it. If you remember, for the first week, the young men and women were socialising with each other and partying. At Nahara, I did overhear one young man say to another, "Can we swap bunks so I'm a bit near to my sweetheart so we can cuddle up tonight?" So there were holiday romances going on. When I spoke to one young man about it later on, he agreed, but he said it had sort of spoilt the first week of the Camino because some people paired up, some people didn't, but it just adds all that stress, and people aren't really thinking about the pilgrimage but about who they'd like to meet and who they'd talk to, and women don't like being pestered and men don't like being turned down and all that sort of thing. So after the first week it all calmed down a bit, although I did see one young man 4 or 5 times at different times throughout the whole Camino, and every time I saw him he was walking with a different young woman. So for an old man, being in love is a nightmare, and I have a theory that being in love is a nightmare at any age, but it just takes you 30 years to work it out. So whenever a woman came to speak to me, or especially if she'd spoken to me before, I was sort of polite and friendly, but tried to keep myself to myself, and then maybe I'd walk a bit further so I didn't bump into her again by accident. Now it's quite possible you're watching this thinking, as much as we like the Count Everything channel, we're guessing you're not the sort of person who has to put up with being pestered by women. Well, that is true, but at the time it seemed quite rational, although looking back now I can see it does seem a bit mad. But there was at least one old man who got caught up in the madness of love, so you have to be careful. Also, I have seen personally a man who's married, and he hasn't actually exactly become besotted for a woman, but he's very fond of her. They've walked together, you regularly see them together. I'm quite when I speak to him, and I haven't mentioned directly, but I get the impression he wants to be faithful to his wife and intends to be platonic with the woman, but it's just a high risk thing. He's tormenting himself. In some ways it's better to avoid temptation than it is to try and resist it, but that's the nature of friendships and love. So it finally dawned on me that the women all along the Camino weren't pestering me, but they were just trying to be kind to me. So there you are, the 5 glamorous Irish women bestowed a benefit on me. I appreciate it now. Did it change me? No, not really. I'm far too set in my ways to change now, but it was just nice to remember how things used to be, just for one night. you en Camino. The next day I went up another one of these alternate routes that runs parallel to the main Camino, which I preferred because it's very quiet. I stayed in an albergue, a vegan menu, usual dormitory. The communal meal, again, dozens of people sitting along long benches, so it was okay. The next day I got to Astorga, and Astorga's good because it's got quite a good cathedral, and you expect Burgos and Leon and Santiago to have good cathedrals, but there was a nice surprise and it had a museum, so it's a good thing to go around. At Astorga I ate on my own and it was fantastic, no polite conversation, no being harassed by glamorous women. It was just nice to eat on my own, no having to speak Spanish for an hour as I did one night, no dinner with a man I sort of half fallen out with. It was just nice to sit on your own, and the only thing you had to worry about was what type of ice cream you were going to have for dessert, which is an important decision to make, I find. The next place I stayed was at Rabanal. It was an English-run Donativo. They welcome you with water, you queue up and they welcome you individually, you make your donation, they ask you if you have any bed bugs, which is where I got deloused. That night I had a dinner with an Australian man. It's just nice, just two of us. 2 New Zealand women next door wanted to talk to us, but I was getting used to putting up with glamorous women by that time, so it was okay. Next day is the going up the mountain to get to the Iron Cross, and you have to get up early to see the sunrise first thing in the morning. When I got to the top, the Iron Cross and that area, the top of the hill, is all surrounded in trees, so you can't see the sun until it's quite high up. But going up towards it, going up the hill towards it, your view is completely unblocked, so that's a better way to see the sunrise, I think. When I got there, the Iron Cross is quite small, so I was a bit disappointed. But the good thing about getting to the top of the hill and seeing the Iron Cross is after that is all a bit of a downhill section, so that was nice going downhill. So that was the end of week 3. And next week you can be quite sure it's going to be another dull video about week 4. So thank you for watching and goodbye.